Hello gamers, and welcome to the Brawl King Finals. Today we're going to find out which of these fleets truly deserves the title of Brawl King. I've also been promised that there's a special cameo at the end of the video. For the tournament itself, of course, we've got exactly 6 contestants left, and as I said at the beginning, it's mostly frigate spam. After all, when his tournament says you can use up to 12 ships, you'd better be using 12 ships. Of course, the 4 contestants up in the winner's bracket are Ubernoob, Idiopathic, Tranquility, and Big Brain Energy. Well, meanwhile, we've got Lortus and the Burning Ones in the loser's bracket. Up first, Ubernoob versus Idiopathic. Of course, both of these players brought different variants of a high-tech, high-mobility fleet, with Ubernoob going into Afflictors and Scarabs as his main fleet. The Afflictors are all in on light needlers for that kinetic damage, while the Scarabs bring burst lasers for anti-armor and anti-hull damage. While specializing like this is potentially a risky move, so far it's paid off for him. Idiopathic's fleet has a mix of safety override Medusas, as well as long-range beam support Medusas, all of which are loaded up with converted hangars for some Talons. This worked extremely well against Hyperions, but against the burst laser Scarabs might not be as effective. Along with that, he's got a few Omens for support, as well as a single Centurion for flavor. Which of these two fleets is going to come out on top? I think it could really go either way, so let's jump into the battle and find out.
Round 1, fight!
You can see the Scarabs rushing forward right at the start of the battle, and it looks like those Talons are getting shredded to pieces. This is one of the advantages of going burst lasers for anti-armor, is they're also going to be very good against missile and fighter-based strategies. You can see that 2 Scarabs on the left are teaming up against Medusa, but with that soft flux damage, they may not be able to break through the dissipation of safety override ships. You can see not much is happening yet. That Scarab is caught in a 1v1. Now, the Medusa is probably going to have a hard time killing that Scarab, because it can use its temporal shell to disengage very easily. Similarly, over here, Triple Scarab might have a hard time killing this Medusa, although this one does not have safety overrides. It can use its face skimmer to jump away, but as long as that Scarab can catch it before it gets away, the timing with temporal shell lets it keep the distance, let it stay close enough to actually finish it off. Very impressive. Now, every time they jump, the Medusas do let their shields down for a second, and if a Scarab is positioned beside it, they can actually slip some shots through, and those Medusas do not have a lot of hull, so even if they can't break through the shields directly, if the Medusas are jumping around too much, they may find themselves without any hull left after just a few shots. And of course, when it comes to the Omens, they might keep their shields up all the time, but the burst damage from those light needlers is going to shred their shields to pieces. So far, it's looking very much in Ubernoob's favor. I'm not seeing a whole lot of action in reverse. Yes, one of those glimmers did go down. I see that in the kill feed in the top left. But the Scarabs so far have been very, very impressive in their performance against these Medusas. Of course, the Medusas don't actually have a lot of shield strength, strictly speaking. They don't have a lot invested in capacitors. But I don't think that would make much of a difference in this case. It seems like the issue is mostly down to whenever they use their face skimmers to reposition, they're vulnerable to taking some damage from those burst lasers, and even if they keep their shields up, the Afflictors are going to get through eventually. It looks like this is turning out in Ubernoob's favor for the first one. I have a hard time imagining Idiopathic is going to be able to come back. Of course, things could play out very differently depending on the positioning. You can see here, it really does take multiple Scarabs ganging up on one Medusa to pressure it into using its phase skimmer. It looks like in a 1v1, I haven't seen a Scarab actually kill a Medusa, which would be very impressive if it was possible, given the Medusa is much more powerful just in terms of raw stats. And that round 1 goes to Ubernoob.
Round 2, fight!
Let's see if anything plays out differently in round 2. Those Medusas are charging forward and throwing their Talons right into the meat grinder. There they go. Nothing better than being a Talon pilot in this sector, I can tell you that much. Here we can see 2 Medusas actually ganging up on a single Glimmer. That thing does not look like it's going to last long. But of course, the Glimmers are not the real prize here. The real prize is the Scarabs. Yes, the Afflictors are scary, and that is a lot of damage. In fact, maybe the Afflictors can 1v1 the Medusas, given those kinds of damage numbers, but now it's getting distracted by the Talons, and there's no Scarabs nearby to take care of them. It's constantly trying to use its light needlers to shoot at the Talons, which is just a horrible waste of its potential damage. And, ooh, it decides to vent right in front of the Medusa. It takes a lot of damage. It's not quite out yet, but with those Talons constantly harassing it, it doesn't look like the situation is very good. All it takes is a few stray shots at this point from one of those Vulcans on the Talons, and that Afflictor is going to be out of here. Its flux is nearly maxed out, and on the left we can see one of the Medusas is actually beating a Scarab, and it takes it out. So yes, the Medusas can beat the Scarabs in a 1v1, but when the Scarabs gang up on them, they're able to win that matchup. So this looks like it might be very positioning dependent. There goes another Medusa. It might be a bit more positioning dependent rather than a straightforward one-sided matchup. Of course, at this level of the tournament, that should be expected. Most of these fleets are going to be very well constructed in order to win a lot of their early matchups. And so when two fleets are at high quality, you can expect a lot more of the matchups to come down to variance rather than one fleet being strictly better. Of course, there's also the case that some fleets are rock, paper, scissors type matchups, and sometimes you just get unlucky. But a lot of these high-level fleets are going to be more versatile, let's say. And as a result, they're going to be a lot more dependent on variance. Of course, you can see the Afflictors. That's a case of variance for exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes the Afflictors decide to chase a Talon to the edge of the map, even though it's not actually a threat anymore. After the carrier was destroyed, the Talon is trying to exit the map, and the Afflictors are just locked onto it for some reason. That can happen, unfortunately. Here we can see, again, the 1v1, it looks like the Medusa, with the safety of our Medusa with the machine guns, is able to beat the Burst Laser Scarab. It dodges past it. It was about to get surrounded by two of them, but it was able to use its Phase Skimmer to reposition long enough to get the kill, while the other one was unable to actually stop it. And in this case, they take it out. There's not much left for either side. This is coming down to the wire. Ubernoob takes round 1, but will Idiopathic manage to scrape out a win in round 2? That Afflictor is doing a lot of damage to that Medusa's hull with just its light needlers. Very impressive stuff. After all, Medusas are entirely reliant on shields. Their armor and hull is pretty paper thin as far as destroyers go. So a pure kinetic build is actually not terrible. Although, of course, the Afflictor is still being harassed by Talons, and it goes down. It just didn't have any hull left, and so even a little bit of damage from those Talons was going to finish it off. Now, there is still this Afflictor. If these guys had been participating earlier in the fight, this would have gone a lot more in Ubernoob's favor, but I guess they were just busy chasing that one Talon. It comes down to a much more interesting final matchup, though, even if it's not exactly fair in that sense. Of course, the Afflictor does win the 1v1, as we've seen before. And now it's just an Afflictor versus a Centurion, and the Centurion being the one fleet, or the one ship in Idiopathic's fleet that has decent armor. Ironically, despite being a frigate. But that doesn't mean it's going to beat the Afflictor. Again, this is pre-nerf Afflictor, 10 deployment points for a ship that's easily worth more than that, and with the extra damage from its damage amplifier ability, entropy amplifier, it might actually be able to break through the armor and hull of the Centurion. Because the damage amplification doesn't just increase the DPS, but it also effectively increases the hit strength of those shots. So while light needlers have fairly low hit strength, when you factor in entropy amplifier, it might actually be able to do it. Although it looks like it is going to take a while. And if it's very close, it's almost finished the job. We might only be here for another 10 hours. Come on, it's so close. Just get it. Just kill it. There's a few missiles flying around, and the Afflictor's being very careful to dodge those, as we can see here, and I spoke too soon. That was a double knockout.
Round 2, fight.
Okay, so I think pretty clearly Ubernoob won that round, and it was only a double knockout because the Afflictor pilot decided to unphase into a missile after Idiopathic's fleet was defeated. I think that was pretty clearly an Ubernoob win, but it looks like we're doing a repeat of round 2 regardless. I think it would be very frustrating if Idiopathic managed to win 2 rounds here, because I think the first 2 rounds are pretty clearly in Ubernoob's favor. But I'm not going to complain if I get to see more combat. The light show is very pretty. Again, this is mostly going to come down to positioning and just the AI quirks. Will the ships be able to coordinate and surround the Medusas, or will they get picked off one at a time? This is mostly coming down to variance here, mostly coming down to stuff the player does not have control over. Unfortunately, when you have two players who built very highly tuned fleets that are designed to take on a wide range of foes, that removes most of the skill factor, because both of them are about same skill level, right? And both of these fleets are very versatile. They've proven over the course of the tournament that they can take on a wide range of enemies. And therefore, most of this is going to come down to just the randomness of the AI rather than any other factors. And in this case, you can see where the Afflictor was actually able to 1v1 the safety of Ride Medusas. Interestingly enough, it seems to struggle against the support Medusas, because the beams are keeping it in phase, and so it's not really able to do any damage. And every time it unphases, while the Ion Beam's not doing a whole lot of damage, the Talons were harassing it quite effectively. Here we can see one of the Scarabs gets surrounded by all those Medusas. It goes down, and now the Afflictor, while it can beat the Medusas, it's being harassed by way too many Talons and has no support. So it's going to keep phasing and unphasing. Luckily, it is focusing down that Medusa instead of trying to shoot down the Talons, which is a good choice, but at this point, its Flux is maxing out, and there is a lot of enemies on top of it. And that's about it. It tries to go for a vent to hopefully reset its Flux and get out of there, but it was not good enough. Here we can see all of these ships harassing that one Omen. They do kill it. But now it looks like there's just the two Afflictors and two Scarabs against a lot of Medusas. Of course, the Scarabs can take out the Fighters, which does a lot to help clear the way for the Afflictors. But if they get split up like this, then they're going to have a lot more trouble. They really need to work together to take out these Medusas. Right, the Medusas would rather get those 1v1s instead of a coordinated battle. And so far, it looks like that is what they're getting. The Medusas are actually looking a lot stronger than they did in the first couple of rounds, because they're just performing a lot better. Again, this is coming down to the variance in the AI. And it looks like Idiopathic is actually going to take round 2.
Final round. Fight!
Now, I will be very upset if, no hate to Idiopathic here, but I will be very frustrated if he does actually pull out a win on this one, because it felt like round 2 was pretty clearly an Ubernoob victory, and the fact that his ship died after the battle was over doesn't really change that. Although it was very funny, I will give it that. The Afflictor pilot was very funny, and it was an excellent prank. It was an excellent prank. Gold star. But I'm really thinking that this one should go to Ubernoob. So let's see if the variance plays out in his favor this time, because, well, Idiopathic took round 2 very convincingly. I think all of his Medusas actually survived. The Scarabs are clearing up all of the Talons, and the Afflictors are able to back up behind them in vents, so far, so good. Although that kind of 1v1 for that Scarab is not looking too good, but the Medusa is scared off because of the nearby Afflictor, and it gives the Scarab a chance to vent and reset its Flux. That Afflictor is, of course, a little bit surrounded, but that's not really an issue for a phase ship. It can just slip its way out of there. The Scarabs might have a bit more of an issue if they find themselves in a similar situation. That Scarab does manage to get some shots in on the Omen, slipping past shields. It only needs to do that in, like, one more time, and that Omen will be gone. Those things have paper armor and paper hull. Paper mache. All of those Talons getting cleaned up, opening up the way for the Afflictors to potentially score some kills here. It looks like the Scarab is 1v1ing that Omen in the bottom left, and now Ubernoob's ships are forming up. They are ganging up on this one Medusa, which is exactly what he wants. It's just barely managing to slip away, though. The Glimmer is getting a little bit close there, and it might find itself surrounded very soon. Although this Afflictor does find a 1v1, it's against another Beam Medusa, which they tend to struggle with. The combination of beam weapons and Talons not doing it any favors here. Looks like the Glimmer died, but also an Omen died off screen. And again, yes, the Afflictor, while it does perform well against the safety of Ride Medusas, it's struggling against the beam ones. Although they don't have enough killing power to actually finish it off. so it does manage to slip away. It's just being suppressed. Of course, the kill feed is saying that a lot of Idiopathic ships have died off-screen at this point, so his fleet is getting thinned out. It looks like Ubernoob ships are getting the kinds of flanking maneuvers that they really want. They are ganging up on his ships. And I think round 3 is turning in Ubernoob's favor. Of course, I don't want to speak too soon. There are still several Medusas on the field. In fact, there are 4 Medusas on the field, so while the support ships might have been cleaned up mostly, those Medusas do have the potential to score some kills against the Scarabs. And without the Scarabs, the Afflictors are going to have a lot of trouble dealing with the Talons. This round is going on a lot longer. That Medusa does go down. The Scarabs are running out of peak performance time. Temporal Shell does have the downside that, yes, moving 3 times faster is awesome, but it also means your peak performance burns 3 times faster while the ability is active. It's starting to look like he needs to close out this game fairly quickly. Of course, safety overrides on a lot of the Medusas means that they are going to run into a similar problem, regardless of their ability activation, just based off of safety overrides. So whether or not one side or another has a peak performance advantage, they're probably pretty similar. The Afflictors, of course, going into phase space has a similar effect to Temporal Shell. It looks like one of the Medusas there's another Medusa going down. This might be the last Medusa. It's starting to look like things are turning out in Ubernoob's favor. They kill each other at the same time. So all that's left is a couple of Afflictors and a Scarab against this one Centurion. So yes, in the end, it does look like Ubernoob takes it, although it was a lot closer than it first appeared. Alright, that means that Ubernoob is moving up in the tournament and Idiopathic is knocked to the loser's bracket. Up next, we've got Tranquility versus Big Brain Energy. And here, Tranquility has brought 7 Omens. In fact, he's brought more than me, and I'm the Omen guy, so that's a big commitment. On top of that, 2 Pirate Afflictors and 3 Hyperions. He is using all 12 ships that he was given, and the combination of Omens and Hyperions I think is a very solid one. On the other hand, I chose to bring a Paragon, 5 Omens, and 1 regular Afflictor. That has paid off for me so far in the tournament, but I have not had to fight any kind of frigate spam so far. Will this round be any different? Will this round finally knock me off my pedestal? Let's find out.
Round 1, fight!
And here we can see things. We've got the frigates forming up, and in the bottom left, who will win? I think the audience is a little bit biased there, just like the last round, given that it's me that we're talking about. But I actually voted against me here. As I mentioned earlier, my fleet has not had to go up against frigate spam, and as far as frigate spam goes, Tranquility really knows what he's doing. The 7 Omens complement the Hyperions perfectly, because the Hyperions can focus purely on DPS with their double heavy blasters. They don't need to bring it. Their lack of point defense is not a weakness when you've got 7 Omens flying around. And their lack of EMP is not a weakness when you've got 7 Omens flying around. I think that this is a very, very solid fleet combination. He's got the right builds and the right ships. On the other hand, I brought a Paragon, which is great against other capital ships, but against this kind of frigate spam, I mostly rely on the Omens to distract the enemy and keep them off the Paragon long enough for it to start scoring some kills. And it is scoring some kills, but unfortunately 7 Omens is more than 5, and as soon as it drops its shields, it is facing a lot of EMP damage. It really makes me wish that I put an S-modded repair unit on the Paragon. In fact, a Reaper even gets through. This is making it look so much weaker than it did in the earlier rounds, and that is what happens when you are outnumbered. In Star Sector, quantity is a quality of its own. If the tournament says you get to bring 12 ships, this is why you bring 12 ships. Even if you want to bring a capital ship, it's probably best to pick something. Yeah, this is why I voted against myself. It's probably best to pick something that can let you bring another 11 frigates. That way, if the enemy brings 12 frigates, they get caught in 1v1s against your ships, and then your capital ship can go around cleaning them one at a time. Ooh, that's rough. 4 kills.
Round 2, fight!
Well, hopefully in round 2 we do a little better. The Paragon did manage to score, I believe it scored all of the kills. It scored all 4. So it's not like the Paragon is terrible. The problem is, there's just not enough supporting frigates to let it do its work. can see the omens on my side are just getting hounded by far too many ships, and so they get picked off far too easily, which leaves the Paragon isolated. This is exactly why you want to bring a larger number of ships. As long as the Paragon is able to get its guns on target, it is able to do some serious damage to those frigates. But unfortunately, it's just not able to do it fast enough. While I wish I did bring an S-modded repair unit here, I don't think it would have made the difference. This might be as far as she goes, boys. The Paragon, I took her as far as she could go, and it looks like this is it. It is nice to be the last capital ship standing in the top, in the winner's bracket. I do get to take that honor with me. But if this is the kind of experience I'm going to have fighting frigate spam, then I really am not going to be winning this tournament. We're not making a loser's bracket comeback. I don't think it's happening. And there she goes. Compared to the last one, that was a lot faster. It looks like not quite a clean sweep against me, but close. And I am knocked down to the loser's bracket, while Tranquility moves on. And of course, up next we've got Lortus versus Big Brain Energy. Lortus had a similar idea with his Onslaught 14, supported by a large number of frigates. The difference is the Onslaught being cheaper means he can afford to bring more frigates. I do think the Paragon in a 1v1 against the Onslaught is going to have a massive advantage. Tachyon Lances against a shield-shunted Onslaught are a great deal. The only problem is, will it get that 1v1? Again, he has 2 Omens, but he's brought a lot of Glimmers and a Monitor. Meanwhile, I brought 5 Omens and an Afflictor. So on the frigate side, he's definitely got the advantage.
Round 1, fight!
In a sense, you could say that this is a competition of quantity versus quality. His Glimmers are all running up Gamma Cores because he'd rather run more of them than cut back on the Glimmers to run Alpha Cores. Similarly, he's got more frigates, using up the 12 slots that you get. Meanwhile, I chose to give up on some of those slots to bring a Paragon. And here we can see it is getting the 1v1 it wants, and it is doing a lot of damage to that Onslaught. That hull and armor are disappearing a lot faster than I think most players would expect. Shield Shunt is not invincible, and I think this is a pretty good example of exactly why. At that rate, it goes down almost immediately. But again, we still have to deal with the frigate spam. Will it be enough to overcome the lack of a capital ship? Well, for Tranquility, the answer was yes. Now, of course, Lortus doesn't have any Hyperions for that high DPS, but Glimmers are pretty good. Ion Pulsar, with expanded magazines, boosted by the high-energy focus system, can do some serious damage. So far, it's actually letting him kill some of the Omens, and if they can take out the Omens, then the Paragon will be isolated. And of course, the Omens are also good at taking out the Afflictors. So this is putting him in a pretty solid position to surround the Paragon. Unfortunately, that Afflictor is just taking all of those EMP hits because the AI does not consider the arc emitter to be a big threat, so they do not phase through it. Of course, the Afflictor being... That Afflictor pilot needs a raise. He's always winning the 1v1 against enemy Afflictors, but unfortunately, winning the 1v1 against enemy Afflictors is not good enough if the Paragon is busy being torn to pieces by a million Glimmers. The Omens are all gone at this point, it looks like. There's nothing to support the Paragon, and so while it could potentially be very threatening to an Onslaught, when it's getting EMP'd by 5 Glimmers, I guess now 4, then it's going to be very difficult for it to do anything. Yeah, as long as it keeps that shield up, it's going to survive, but Flux goes up. Even if it turns on those Fortress Shields, it's still eventually going to go down. At the very least, keeping the shields up doesn't mean it's not taking EMP anymore. But I don't know if it's going to be able to kill the Glimmers fast enough to matter. Here we can see one of my Omens is being surrounded by 2, although one of them is kind of running away. They're not really sure. You know, they're all kind of... At least one Omen distracting 2 ships is a pretty good deal for me, but that is not good enough when all the other Omens are gone, leaving the Paragon completely isolated. It looks like, in the end, quality does come out on top, because the Paragon gets killed by the Glimmers. All that's left is a couple of Omens, and I think in this case, it's pretty clear that Lortus has the advantage with just having more ships. One Omen is going to have a hard time beating 2 Omens. Regardless of any differences or nuances in the builds, a 1v2 is still a hard situation. especially when it's the same ship. Trading antimatter blaster shots, trading EMP emitters. This Omen has done a good job distracting these two ships, but as soon as the glimmers come in, I think it's over. There she goes. Alright, that's 5 kills.
Round 2. Fight.
Alright, this is the final stand. Can the Paragon make a surprise comeback and actually kill these frigates? Or am I getting knocked out of the tournament? Lortus got knocked out earlier into the loser's bracket, but the person who did knock him out was Tranquility, I believe. So we both got sent to the loser's bracket by the same person, and now we're duking it out to see which of our fleets is better. And so far, it's looking like Lortus has the advantage. Yes, the Paragon is demonstrably beating the Onslaught. In fact, I think Lortus has a really solid fleet composition. But I do think some of these builds are not as... they're a little more questionable. Like the double Pirate Afflictor, supported by Omens, a bunch of Glimmers, and a single Monitor. I think that is a really, really solid fleet composition. The difference is the shield-shunted Onslaught was probably not the best call, especially when he's running Triple Devastator. I think Triple Storm Eater might have been better against this frigate meta. But in any case, I get knocked out of the tournament, and Lortus moves up in the loser's bracket. Next up, we've got the Burning Ones versus Idiopathic. While we saw Idiopathic earlier, the Burning Ones is still bringing that 10 Afflictor fleet. It didn't get knocked out quite yet, and this is his chance to make it back in.
Round 1. Fight.
Now, of course, Talons do give Idiopathic a pretty decent chance at dealing with these Afflictors. We've seen the Talons be a huge problem for them before, as well as the beams on the support Medusas. Omens as well, he's brought a few of those, and the Afflictors, as you can see, are not dodging them most of the time, because the damage isn't very high, but it does flame out their engines and force them into phase to repair. Eventually, of course, the damage does add up if the Afflictors aren't able to score any kills in that time. But also, the Talons. Look at them swarming over that thing. They do manage to take out the Medusa, but you can see this one is just sitting in phase because it's scared of all the Talons, and then it unphases right into an EMP emitter. Now it's going to vent. That does get most of its flux, but it also traded out all of its hull, and as soon as it unphases again, it gets destroyed. Yes, it does look like Idiopathic's fleet is not being caught unprepared. He was ready for phase ships, and the Talons and the Omens are giving him a pretty decent chance of taking these things out. In fact, this Safety Override Medusa doing surprisingly well on its own before the Talons even arrived, and now that they're here, this is looking like it's pretty clearly going to win. There it is. Now, unlike some of the other players earlier in the tournament, Idiopathic's fleet is not totally stomped by pure Afflictor spam. Although the Afflictors are still being able to take out the Medusas, so it's not exactly one-sided. Which of these fleets is going to come out on top? Well, I think, personally, I'm not a fan of mono fleets. I think it would be a bit of a shame if the game's strategy could be reduced to just spamming a single ship. So, I would like the fleet that brings more than one ship to win. Maybe I'm a little biased here. No shade to the Burning Ones, of course. If you think it's the most effective strategy, then you might as well bring it. But in this case, it turns out it's not.
Round 2. Fight.
I think it's pretty straightforward to just say that it's probably healthier for the game, but I think this is a good example of testing the limits. Is 10 Afflictors pre-nerf actually that strong? And they have been pretty strong, but it turns out that even pre-nerf, a more coherent strategy with different ships supporting each other is actually more effective. Or at least it was enough for Idiopathic to win the first round. Can the Burning Ones make a comeback in this round? You can see the Afflictors teaming up on that Medusa in the bottom left, but the Omen is coming in and disabling its weapons. Of course, the other Afflictor is able to score an overload, and all it takes is like one antimatter blaster shot to delete the hull. That's another Medusa looks like it's in a bit of trouble. The Afflictor's not unfazing yet, but all it takes is another Afflictor to come in from the side and swoop in to finish it off while it's facing the wrong way. That is a lot of Afflictors for one Medusa to handle, and there's no Talons in sight. Now, fortunately for Idiopathic, the Medusa is keeping its distance, and the Afflictors are not quite able to finish it off. That Omen being supported by those Talons, disabling the engines, and then the Talons forcing it into phase with their missiles, and the Medusa is able to do a lot of damage there. Yes, it does look like Idiopathic's fleet is pretty consistently dealing with these Afflictors. Even though the Afflictors are scary, they're not unbeatable. I sure wouldn't want to fight them though with my Paragon, I can tell you that much. It does look like the Centurion goes down in the explosion as the Afflictor dies, but with all of these Medusas still standing, in fact, only one of them seems to be missing. And on the other hand, there's only 2 Afflictors remaining. This looks like a pretty clear-cut win for Idiopathic. And I'd have a hard time imagining how these 2 Afflictors could make a comeback, or rather, 1 Afflictor, or 0, because that is a win for Idiopathic. So Idiopathic moves on in the loser's bracket, and the Burning Ones is knocked out of the tournament. Next up, we've got Lortus versus Idiopathic, the Onslaught fleet versus the Medusa fleet.
Round 1, fight!
Well, the Onslaught has lost a high-tech, high-mobility before, but how will it handle the Medusas? It does have Triple Devastator, which is pretty good for dealing with the Talons, and the frontal firepower of those thermal pulse cannons has already removed 1 Medusa from the field. That's looking like a pretty good start for Lortus. All of these Medusas are going to be outnumbered by his Glimmers, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be outmatched. They are over twice the cost of those Glimmers, and they have level 6 officers as opposed to the level 4 Gamma Cores. It does look like with a little support from that Omen, they take one of them out. Of course, the Monitor is here as well, and if it can do a good job distracting some of these Medusas, that could give him a huge advantage. As long as the Onslaught is picking off those Medusas, Lortus could find himself the winner of this matchup. But whether or not that's going to happen is going to come down to a lot of unknown variables. Can the Onslaught handle multiple Medusas at the same time? They are trying to go in for flanking maneuvers. Of course, the EMP damage from those Medusas is not that scary because the Onslaught does have an S-Slotted repair unit. And in fact, the Onslaught pilot is smart enough to vent even. A rarity for the AI, but it does know how to do it sometimes. Again, this is a case where, while the Devastators do handle the fighters pretty well, what the Onslaught really needs is triple Stormweaver. In fact, I think Lortus' fleet might have done better with one of Pixie Code's Onslaughts, which is ironic because he did beat Pixie Code earlier in the tournament. But using one of her Onslaughts as the flagship of his fleet, with its triple Stormweaver build, would give it a much bigger advantage against these kinds of ships. The Stormweavers are good enough to take out Talons, because of how fragile they are, and at the same time they would have incredible DPS against the very strong shields that we're seeing in the last few fleets of this tournament. And of course, one of the big downsides of this Onslaught is it has no guns on the rear, except for a couple of thumpers that can somewhat fire backwards. And it looks like Idiopathic ships are taking full advantage of this weakness, a lot of them coming up behind it, although the Onslaught does manage to kill another Medusa. If it can keep this up, it might be able to solo the rest of the fleet, although, yeah, it doesn't look like the armor's been broken through quite yet. The shield shunt is holding up, and it has killed a couple of Medusas so far, but those Reapers are also not doing it any favors. Not very useful against these high-tech ships. For the most part, they're just going to miss. And of course, the Onslaught, once again, venting, because the AI just loves to do that with shield-shunted ships. Sometimes, maybe. If it's in a good mood, it'll do it. It does have support from that Afflictor, increasing its damage output as long as it uses its ability on the right targets. He's still got a Glimmer and an Omen, but those are not going to have very good matchups unless they can surround the Medusas with a few friends. I don't see where those friends have gone. So far, this could really go either way. It doesn't feel like either side has a strong advantage here. Although that Glimmer does look like it's in a lot of trouble, it doesn't have any point defense, so those Talons are just doing a pretty good job distracting it. Yeah, the Medusa's able to take it out. If it's too busy firing its iron pulsers and talons, then it's not really fighting the Medusa. And that can be a problem for it. Again, those Reapers, while they are bright red and very cool, and very effective against a fellow Onslaught, they're not so effective against Medusas, which are just going to move out of the way. And the Medusas are picking off his ships. I'm not seeing any glimmers left on the field. All that's really left by the looks of it is one Glimmer, one Afflictor, which is currently being harassed by fighters, so it's not doing a whole lot, and then there's the Onslaught. Now the Onslaught so far has done a pretty good job at actually killing Medusas. Or at least it's killed 2 of them, but there's currently at least 3 still on the field. Now if they do get in front of it and they die, that gives Lortus a huge advantage here. Because that's at least 3 of them down. I'm only seeing the 2 on the field. So the Onslaught has performed very well against these Medusas, where I believe Pixie Codes was taken out by these Medusas earlier in the tournament. So that Shield Shunt is doing him a lot of favors here. And to be fair, he does have Light Needlers as well, although, again, something on the rear so that he doesn't get flanked like this would give him a much bigger chance of winning this one. Shield Shunt doesn't last forever, and that Heavy Blaster will chew through it eventually. And if the Onslaught can't fire backwards, then it doesn't matter if he's killed the rest of the fleet. It only takes a couple of... Well, really, it only takes one ship behind it to finish it off. And it is actually losing a significant chunk of hull at this point, so the armor is broken through. Of course, the Medusas could end up accidentally sliding in front of all of its guns. There's only room for one of them behind the ship. So one of them's going to try and move out of the way to make room, and it had to back off to vent flux. But it was able to do so pretty freely. Yes, it looks like without any support and without any guns on the rear, this Onslaught is... It's lost most of its hull at this point. It's even using its burn drive to try and run away from the Medusas, so that it can give itself some space to turn around. But of course, the AI is not just going to run and charge in at the front against an isolated ship. It's going to go around the flank. And you see the Medusa is just moving around behind it. Now, it does manage to max out the flux. It is forced to use its face skimmer to disengage, and the other Medusas coming in from the other side. This is really a question of can the Medusas get behind it, or can the Onslaught keep them off of its rear? That's the real question here. It's the only question that matters at this point, because it looks like there's not really anything else left on the field. The Onslaught is trying its best to use the Zero Flux boost to turn as fast as possible, and make sure that one of the Medusas doesn't get behind it, but then the other one is able to slip in from the other side, so it's going to use its burn drive to try and get some distance, but the Medusa is able to keep pace, and so it's able to close the distance again. Especially if it manages to get those engines offline, the Onslaught's going to be in a lot of trouble, although it's going to be temporary trouble. The S-Mod repair unit, yeah, see, there the engines go, but they're going to be back online very quickly. S-Mod repair unit's going to keep it online, but it looks like it's not good enough, and the Medusa is able to take it out. The lack of rear guns really biting him in the ass right now.
Round 2, fight.
Well, that was incredibly close. I think that Lortus, as I said earlier, has a very solid fleet composition, but the lack of point defense on those Glimmers is really giving them a lot of trouble when faced by the Talons, and the lack of rear guns on his Onslaught is giving him a lot of trouble with the Medusas. Other than that, his fleet is actually performing really well against what is probably... Well, I guess both of them are spamming frigates, so I can't really say that he's not running meta. So, hopefully the Glimmers can do a little bit better this time. At least that's what he should be hoping for, but it looks like this one is getting taken out by the Omens and the Talons. Yeah, this is a case where, while the Iron Pulsar is going to give those Glimmers great DPS, the lack of any turreted weapons in its turret slots means that the fighters are a huge problem for them. And unfortunately, he's only running 2 Omens, which is not enough to make up the difference. Now, the Monitor did get taken out in the first round, although it did seem to happen off-screen. That thing should be able to tank for a while, but I guess against the light machine guns that the Medusas are running, they have enough kinetic DPS to break through its shields. If they're able to surround it, I assume. Yeah, something like this, probably. I didn't see it happen, but it was probably something like that. Now, the Onslaught has proven that it's able to kill the Medusas as long as it has some kind of frigate support that prevents them from sneaking up behind it and destroying it from the rear. It's proven actually very effective at that. but it really comes down to how fast his frigates collapse. That monitor is doing a great job distracting all of those Medusas, making sure that they don't get behind the onslaught, but his other frigates have mostly disappeared, and so the Medusas are getting behind it. The onslaught, it really needs to get its guns on target, and it really relies on its frigate support to keep the other ships off of it. In this case, the monitor is holding out for quite a while, but that flux is going up. It is not going down. Even with its flux shunt, it's not invincible. And it looks like there's still at least 4 Medusas, and off-screen there's definitely a lot of markers that are green. So it looks like Idiopathic's fleet is winning here. But unlike the first round, the Onslaught isn't scoring a bunch of Medusa kills early on, and it looks like that is a huge problem for his fleet. Those Medusas are very strong against the Glimmers in this matchup, it looks like. And the Monitor is very close to hitting its limit. The machine guns and the Iron Pulsers and the Heavy Blasters eventually breaking it. And that leaves the Onslaught to fight everything on its own. And while it does do a pretty good job in the first round, in the second round, it was not able to kill enough of the Medusas in the early fight, which then let his frigates all get wiped out too quickly, and now it's just completely surrounded. There she goes. All that's really left is the Afflictors at this point, but 2-powered Afflictors is not going to be able to do this. We've seen it before. Afflictors can be handled fairly easily by the Talons and the Omens. A great supporting ship for the Onslaught, but not able to carry the game by themselves. And that's the end of the round. And Lortus is knocked out of the tournament, while Idiopathic moves up through the losers bracket. Up next, we got Ubernoob versus Tranquility. Scarabs and Afflictors versus Omens and Hyperions.
Round 1. Fight!
While it is true that the top end of the tournament is all high-tech, high mobility, it is impressive that everyone managed to come up with different variations of it. Scarab Afflictor, Omen Hyperion, and Medusas are pretty different combinations of ships. Although, of course, at the end of the day, they all rely on shields and mobility. There goes one of the Glimmers. In fact, both of the Glimmers, it looks like, got taken out pretty early. Which of these fleets is going to win is really hard to say. We've seen the Scarabs actually kill Hyperions in the past by getting their beams right through during the teleport, but as long as they keep their shields up, the soft flux damage from those beams is going to have a very hard time actually killing those Hyperions. Of course, that's where the Afflictors are supposed to come in and make up the difference. Although in this case it looks like his Scarabs are actually killing the enemy Afflictors, which of course we've seen before against the pure Afflictor fleet, so that's not too much of a surprise. But the real question is, like, Tranquility's Afflictors are not going to be too important to this matchup, I believe. It's mostly down to whether or not Ubernoob's Afflictors are able to put pressure onto the Hyperions just like this. This is exactly what he wants. He needs those Afflictors to apply pressure to those Hyperions so that the Scarabs can finish them off with the burst lasers. I think that's going to be key to this matchup. Here we can see another Afflictor coming in to take the pressure off, so the other one does actually manage to slip away on low hull. Although at this point, the Afflictor might be able to 1v1 it. With all the armor stripped off, even Light Needlers will be able to finish something like this. It's just a question of can it get enough DPS, and it has used its teleport, so I believe that ability is on cooldown, it can't just jump away. But if an Omen comes in and takes aggro from the Afflictor, then the Hyperion is going to have an opportunity to drop its shields and dissipate. Although the Afflictor does just kill the Omen, and then another one comes in, which is not looking good for the Afflictor. Oh, it actually unphases and gets taken out by the Jackhammer. That's pretty unusual. I was not expecting torpedoes to kill an Afflictor, but here it is. And we've seen the Scarabs do pretty well against the Omens, although it does look like that one was flamed out for a second there. Again, they do not have 360-degree shields. He did not opt to take frontal shield conversion, a very popular choice on the Scarabs. Instead, he chose to save his ordnance points for other things, and just leave them with 180-degree Omni shields. In this case, it's just being surrounded and flamed out by these Omens. It is trying its hardest, but where did Ubernoob's fleet go? Did the rest of them get taken out? Because that's what it's got to be for all of these ships to be ganging up on one poor Scarab. Yes, that's right. His fleet did get taken out.
Round 2. Fight.
Well, for the most part, that looked a lot more even, right up until the end where I found out that a lot of his fleet must have died off screen. Let's see if things turn out any different. The Light Needler Afflictors combined with the Burst Laser Scarabs have been a somewhat of a dark horse choice, somewhat a surprisingly successful fleet. Although I did vote for them against the Afflictors, I wasn't really sure they would win. So in a lot of ways, they've impressed a lot of people. I've seen a lot of people surprised that burst lasers can be as effective as they are. And of course, being a high-tech frigate fleet, they are taking advantage of the kind of metagame that emerges when you have a low deployment limit, but high ship count. So they are well positioned in this tournament, but it looks like Tranquility's Omens are just putting too much pressure onto the Afflictors. And because of that, the Afflictors aren't able to put pressure onto the Hyperions, which means that the Hyperions are able to run freely and take out the Scarabs. That's what it looks like is going on. Because we've seen the Afflictor, when it does get a chance to take out the Hyperions, they did do a pretty good job. But if you've got a bunch of Omens all frying it with their EMP emitters, and it has nowhere to run, nowhere to retreat to, then it's not really able to do its job. And the Scarabs are not winning those 1v1s against the Hyperions. It does look like Tranquility is taking this one pretty convincingly. I don't think this one is coming down to variance. This is looking a little too consistent. Those Afflictors aren't even taking out that Omen. It's too afraid to unphase at this point. Even though it could do a lot of damage to that Omen, it's just letting its flux max out. It sees the antimatter blasters in range, and it just does not want to unphase right into that, and well, it would pretty close to being one-shot by one of those. So that's understandable. But yes, it does look like the Omens with their EMP emitters kept the Afflictors too suppressed to actually take out the Hyperions, which then let the Hyperions clean up the rest of the fleet. So in the end, Tranquility's strategy ends up working out better for him than Ubernoob's strategy. Both of them relied on two ships, on a core of two ships that synergize well together. The Hyperions being supported by the Omens versus the Burst Laser Scarabs supported by the Light Needler Afflictors. And in the end, it looks like the Hyperion-Omen combo is the one that comes out on top. And that means Tranquility is moving on to the finals, while Ubernoob is knocked to the loser's bracket. And here, ironically, we're having a repeat of a match we saw earlier, Idiopathic versus Ubernoob. Will things turn out any differently this time?
Round 1. Fight.
I think, as we saw in the matchup earlier today, this match is very high variance. Either one of them could come out on top, but whoever wins still has to face Tranquility in the finals. And I think Tranquility had a pretty convincing victory against Ubernoob. So now it's a question of, first of all, who gets to the finals? And if it's Idiopathic, does he stand a chance against Tranquility's very efficient combination of ships? Well, it did feel a little unfair when the rounds went beyond the point where that Afflictor decided to sabotage Ubernoob's fleet by unphasing into Harpoon for no reason. What we did see in the following matches was that this was not actually a one-sided matchup, although it did look kind of that way at first. And this is actually a very, very high variance matchup, and either one of these fleets could come out on top. So things might turn out differently, and I think having a clean slate to try again is perfectly fair at this point. Neither player has won yet. Neither player has really proven that their fleet is on top. Idiopathic did take the win the first time, thankfully. Again, that did feel kind of unfair that the Afflictor sabotaged him like that, but he did end up winning anyways. The question is that going to be consistent? And I'm not so sure about that. That Medusa is under a lot of pressure, though. His Afflictor... Those Afflictors might be able to take it out. Yes, it actually is able to take it out. Again, once they break through the shields, which he did not invest too much into capacitors. So it doesn't take too much for these Afflictors to actually break through those shields. And then once they do, the Medusas are going to evaporate under any kind of pressure. In fact, the Centurion might be a tougher target for them just due to damper field and having... It actually has better armor than the Medusas. So at least for the Afflictors by themselves, it'd be a tougher target. But once the Burst Laser Scarab gets involved, that Centurion is going to disappear. Yeah, we can see here that that one Scarab by itself, the soft flux from the Burst Lasers, is not really doing anything to those shields. So the lack of capacitors in that case is not really hurting it at all. It's just a question of when the Scarabs are going to get some support from the Afflictors. And he is at least keeping the Talons off the field, which does make things easier for the Afflictors to get in there. And we can see that peak performance, for both of these fleets, peak performance is a severe limiting issue. Right, the Scarabs and the Afflictors both burn through their peak performance faster due to their time speed up from their abilities, while the Medusas have safety overrides, which is burning through their peak performance. And it does look like, yes, Ubernoob takes round 1.
Round 2, fight.
Unfortunately for Ubernoob, even if he does win this, which so far is looking like, as long as his Afflictors don't sabotage him again, he's going up against the fleet that knocked him into the losers bracket in the first place, so we'll have another repeat matchup that doesn't look too good for Ubernoob. On the other hand, Idiopathic is once again losing the first round, although his fleet has proven that it can take a round off of Idiopathic. He does need to take 2 in a row at this point, which puts him in a pretty awkward position. And that Medusa is already putting him in a pretty rough spot. It's going down very quickly, and this Medusa is putting him in an even worse spot. It's basically asking to get flanked and destroyed, although it does manage to reposition with its face skimmer, so now it's no longer surrounded by the enemy, and it has support from another Medusa. It doesn't go down just yet, although both of them are under a lot of pressure. That flux bar is nearly maxed out, and there's a lot of ships pushing onto them with a lot of aggression. The Afflictor is trying to get behind the Medusa. Maybe not the best strategy. It's so close to being dead, and there it is. It's another Medusa down. Does look like a Glimmer and a Scarab go dead off-screen. And another Scarab goes dead off-screen. Well, that's certainly very impressive, because on-screen everything has looked very much in Ubernoob's favor, but Idiopathic scoring kills off-screen might offset the difference. The Centurion goes down as well. Meanwhile, the Scarab is trying to essentially 1v1 this Medusa because the Afflictor is just not helping out. Unfortunately, the Afflictor is probably too scared of those Talons, and it doesn't want to approach. Meanwhile, the Scarab was failing to shoot them down with its burst lasers. Here come the Medusas. These seem to be the ones that have been scoring kills off at the top of the map. Now they're marching victorious. These Afflictors, though, without any support from the Scarabs, are not really able to deal with the Talons all that well. They really do need the Scarabs to come in and clean up the Talons so that they can do their thing. Unfortunately, that Scarab is off to the right. It's getting distracted by an Omen. It's not really helping the Afflictors, and now it's kind of getting chased by 2 Medusas. And we have seen that some of the Medusas are able to deal with the Afflictors, although some of them aren't. It's taking a lot of damage, but now there's Talons harassing that Afflictor, and it decides to vent while the Omen hits it with its EMP emitter. Does not kill it, but it has done a significant amount of damage at this point. And the Afflictor takes out one of the Omens. Now there's 2 Afflictors ready to harass that Medusa, but again, the phase AI is going to be a lot more timid when there's Talons harassing it. It really doesn't want to take damage from them, which then means that the Medusa is able... Well, it takes a lot of pressure off the Medusa, even though it is so close to being killed. There's the Overload. They might be able to finish it off, but no, it looks like the Overload ends, and it's using its phase skimmer, jumping around everywhere, and most of its flux goes back down. Very close. It actually managed to survive an Overload. Pretty unusual. Oh, there... It somehow doesn't die to that. It's so close. There it is. That Medusa does go down. The Talons going off to attack the Afflictor. It looks like the other Afflictor, after breaking off, actually died. And now we've got a Glimmer plus a Scarab attacking this Medusa. But the Glimmer is going to be... It's not fast enough to escape the Medusas, and the back end being open means that it doesn't... Well, the Talons could pose a threat to it, but I don't think that was really an issue at this point. The Afflictor shows up a little too late to help its friend. Most of the Talons are gone, but it does look like the Afflictor is still kind of scared of them, even if there's only a couple of them left. And that Burst Laser Scarab is being killed by the Medusa off on the right side, and the Afflictor's too busy with its own 1v1 to help it. These two ships really do need to work together to take on these Medusas. And if they get caught into 1v1s, it does look like it was a very close round, but there's not much left on the field. There's still two Medusas. This Afflictor is going down at this point. And it looks like Idiopathic actually takes round 2. No shenanigans this time.
Final round. Fight!
Yes, it looks like this time there wasn't an incredible level of sabotage from the Afflictors, although some level of quirkiness from the AI is unavoidable, especially when there's no player to give them direction. Not really clear who's winning at this point. It really could go either way, although Idiopathic did win the first time. Or no, sorry, Ubernoob won the first time. I wouldn't count Idiopathic out just yet. He's able to take 2 rounds off of Ubernoobs in total so far, versus 3 wins for Ubernoob. So it's very close between these two fleets. It really could be either one. It looks like this Medusa is putting itself in a pretty terrible position again. That does seem to happen pretty consistently, is at least 1 or 2 Medusas get itself in a terrible position, but in this case the Omens come in to bail it out, drawing aggro from the enemy while the Medusa skimmers away, and its flux goes back to 0. And here it's being attacked by a Glimmer and a Scarab, but that soft flux is just not going to do anything. You either need multiple Scarabs to apply pressure and scare it into using its phase skimmer, which will then drop its shields briefly, letting some of the lasers get through. That's one option. Or another option is to just have an Afflictor do the damage. But without either of those things happening, the one Scarab by itself is not going to do anything. At the top, actually, there's one Afflictor that looks like it's having the worst day of its life, being harassed by multiple squads of Talons, and not really being able to do anything about it. And in this case, this Afflictor is having the best day of its life, winning the 1v1 pretty easily, but then the Talons show up and it decides to run away. Again, the phase ships are going to be very, very intimidated by fighters, especially when they have a complete lack of point defense. And it looks like this Omen, again, the lack of 360 shields on the Scarabs, giving the Omens a pretty significant advantage against them, because they are able to sneak past those Omni shields and get to the engines. Not enough of an advantage to score a kill, but enough to keep them very busy. And this Afflictor, it's nearly maxed out on Flux and it's very low on hull, so while it should be able to win a 1v1 against the Omen, it needs to get that Flux down so it can actually move around, like maneuver into a winning position. If it can't do that, then it's going to find itself stuck next to the Omen and taken out by the EMP emitter. This matchup is very, very close, but it does look like the Afflictors in the top left are getting taken out, and while a Medusa did go down as well, if there's not enough Afflictors by the end of the match, then the Medusas do have a winning matchup against these Scarabs. It looks like this Scarab is able to maintain its distance, at least for now, using its temporal shell, but the safety override Medusas are able to keep pace pretty easily. And there it goes. It gets surrounded and picked off. And of course, this Scarab is struggling in the 1v1 against the Omen. It just doesn't have enough damage, with all of its damage being soft flux. The Omen is just shrugging it off with its shields, although the burst during its temporal shell activation does build up a lot of soft flux. You would need at least 2 Scarabs to really break through those shields. With just the one, it's not good enough. And if that Omen gets support from the Centurion, or maybe, then yes, it's going to be very easy for them to take it out. There goes another Afflictor, and it looks like Idiopathic actually wins this time. Incredible. So Idiopathic recovers from the loser's bracket and moves on to the finals, while Ubernoob is knocked out of the tournament. And of course, Tranquility versus Idiopathic in the finals. Omens and Hyperions versus Omens and Medusas. Which of these high-tech fleets is going to prove to be the Brawl King?
Round 1. Fight!
Now, while I am not here in the finals, I feel like I'm at least here in spirit, because both fleets are bringing Omens, and I am the guy who loves to shill Omens to everyone. Although I will say, if Tranquility wins, having 7 Omens, that would be awesome, because that's the most Omens that anyone brought. And if the fleet with the most Omens wins, that just proves that Omens are the best ship ever. But of course, it's too early to really make that call. This could go either way. We've got Hyperions versus Medusas. Both fleets. And somehow it lands a Reaper on that Centurion. Omens are just that awesome. They don't even care that Reapers are not supposed to be used against frigates, but they're going to land them anyways. And it looks like the Medusas are getting a little overwhelmed here. They only have 3 supporting Omens, and wow, they're getting picked off very easily so far. In fact, they're getting picked off even easier than when Idiopathic's fleet won against them. At least that one did. But they feel like they're constantly on the back foot. It's got to be because those... While in the past, the Medusa fleet has won against Hyperions before, the thing is, those Hyperions did not have Omens supporting them, which meant that the Talons in the converted hangars were a big problem for the Hyperions. In this case, 3 Hyperions supported by 7 Omens. What Talons? They don't exist. They were Thanos snapped in like the first 2 seconds of the fight, and every time they respawn, they just get dusted again. So the main problem that the Hyperions faced earlier in the tournament is not a problem for Tranquility's fleet because he chose to bring so many Omens to support them. And in fact, the Omens themselves seem to be having a pretty good matchup against the Medusas. Like, these two are able to do a pretty good job at keeping this thing busy. While they haven't killed it just yet, if a third one comes in, or somebody else comes, or a Hyperion comes in to support it right now, this Medusa would be toast immediately. And I'm assuming that it's probably a similar situation elsewhere, as we see a Medusa fading out of the kill feed at the top left. It's slow, it's steady, but it gets the job done. There it goes. Yeah, it does feel like Idiopathic's fleet was on the back foot the entire round, and round 1 goes to Tranquility.
Round 2, fight.
If he's able to put on a repeat performance, you know, forget any analysis. Omens rock. Omens are the best. I love Omens. Look at them go. Okay, the Hyperion, there were other fleets that brought Hyperions, but again, they did not have Omens for support, and they were knocked out pretty much immediately. I think the other 2 fleets that brought Hyperions, they both lost. They both went 0-2 and were knocked out of the tournament. Meanwhile, Tranquility has not lost a single game because it's not just that he brought overpowered ships. It's that he brought the right combination of ships that also fit into the metagame, where, again, frigate spam is going to be dominant when you have low deployment points but high ship count. So this kind of high-tech frigate fleet fits right into the metagame, and he's got the right combination of Hyperions, which focus highly on DPS but are vulnerable due to their complete lack of point defense, and then Omens that cover that weakness, and are also just a solid ship in their own right. And then, of course, he still manages to squeeze in a couple of Afflictors, which are nerfed in the current patch, but not in the patch that the tournament was played on. So all in all, it's just a very, very solid performance all around from Tranquility's fleet. He has the right combination of ships, and the ships have the right kinds of builds to work together. And it looks like that is exactly why he has not lost a single game. Actually, has he even lost a single round? I would have to go back through the tournament to check, but I can't think of a time where he's lost a round at all. I think he's gone 2-0 in every battle. It looks like when it comes to Brawl King, it might be that Tranquility is just one step ahead of the competition. Or maybe it's just the luck of the Omens. He's blessed by the Omen God because he brought 7 Omens, which is the lucky number and also the highest Omen count in the game. Yeah, I guess there's not really much else to say about this matchup. I think pretty clearly the Omen Hyperion fleet is just outmaneuvering these Medusas, and they don't have enough points invested in their capacity to really shield tank long enough to try and make up the difference. Although whether or not it's feasible to even invest in their shields when he's got to invest into their weapons as much as he did. I'm not really sure. And they're just kind of like staring at each other, you know, they're moving around a bit. But those Talons are just not able to do the job that they were meant to do. They were really good against earlier Hyperions. In this case, it's just not good enough. It does look like that Omen is under a lot of pressure, though, at the top left. The Medusa is pretty close to taking it out. The Omen is just too slippery. It's just very, very difficult. It does finally manage to put it out of its misery, but it really took a while. And there's still plenty more where that came from. At the very least, the match is still going. So I guess Idiopathic still has a chance. Nope, never mind. There's more ships showing up. I was going to say maybe he's winning off screen, but no. Then a bunch more of Tranquility ships show up, the Reaper onto that Medusa. Again, the Omen's just defying logic by hitting all of these faster ships with their Reapers. In the end, it looks like Tranquility just had the best builds and the best ship combination, although... Yeah, you can see everyone running away. This is because we're currently at the edge of the map, and the AI does not like running into the edge of the map. Who knows, maybe the Medusa will sit in the corner and wait for everybody else to run out of performance. Although, having saved overrides itself, that's probably not a real strategy. Wait, it looks like the Hyperions, I think, are having malfunctions. Because I saw its engines flicker for a second, and then come back online, which I guess would be faster repaired. Yeah, they're having malfunctions, but it looks like it doesn't matter. They still take the victory. And you know what that means. The title of Brawl King goes to... Tranquility. Secret fight? Is this the cameo I was told about? I was told there was a secret cameo at the end. A mysterious challenger. I have no idea what this is.
Round 1. Fight.
Is it going to be John Starsector himself? I recognize those motes. It's the Ziggurat. Tranquility versus the Ziggurat. Can the Brawl King's fleet, with only 100 deployment points, beat the Ziggurat? Well, usually high-tech frigates don't do too well against the Ziggurat. Those motes are pretty much able to kill them through their shields. But it does look like the Ziggurat is basically maxed out at flux at this point. All of the ships are swarming right over top of it. It's venting. That Reaper did get taken out by a moat, so it's preserved its hull for now. But they are applying constant pressure. They are not backing off. They're not giving it any space. They're flaming out its engines. They are trying their best to take care of the Ziggurat before they get taken care of by the moats. Because that is usually what gets them killed. The damage through the shield is high enough that it can actually do... There goes some Reapers. Now, that is a lot of damage. It's not going to take much more to finish off the Ziggurat at this point. In fact, once the AI's hull drops low enough, it's going to be really scared, and that means it's going to start staying in cloak a lot longer, which is going to drive up its hard flux and eventually put it in a position where it can't run and it can't hide. There's not a lot of frigates left at this point, but the Ziggurat is maxed out on flux. All it's going to take is a couple good shots, and that's going to be it. It's only got a fraction of its hull left, and there it goes. The Ziggurat loses, and Tranquility takes round 1. What the hell is this?
Round 2. Fight.
All I was told is that there'd be a Mortal Kombat style cameo at the end. I did not know that the winner of the tournament would have to fight the Ziggurat. Well, I guess it's kind of like, are you smarter than a 5th grader? But instead it's, are you smarter than... Well, I'm not really sure what the Ziggurat is, but it's certainly something. Now, they did take the first round, but it was pretty close. The Ziggurat did kill most of the frigates, as it tends to do. Those motes are a huge threat. One of the few weapons in the game that can actually kill frigates through their shields, which of course the player does not get access to this version of motes when you take the Ziggurat. Most of the real energy damage is removed, although the EMP damage remains when the player pilots it. So far, they're not landing any Reapers onto the Ziggurat, and it's sniping those frigates one after another. In fact, even the beam weapons are doing a pretty good job. Rift Cascade emitters are also pretty threatening to frigates just due to sheer energy damage and high accuracy. Although Tachyon Lances would be a bit better for that purpose. It looks like most of the frigates have evaporated. No Reapers this time landing on the Ziggurat's hull, and despite all the pressure they put onto it, It looks like the Ziggurat is managed to take them out this time, which is a lot closer to what you would usually expect from frigates versus Ziggurat. Yeah, that Afflictor is delaying as long as possible. It is trying to keep the dream alive, but it's not good enough. And the Ziggurat takes round 2.
Final round. Fight!
I'm impressed. This really could go either way. This really could go either way. I think it's going to depend on the frigates landing some key torpedoes onto the Ziggurat. There is at least a jackhammer hitting the back end. But the big one would be a Reaper. The Omens can land a Reaper, and there it is! There's a Reaper. That's going to put the Ziggurat under a lot more pressure, as now there's an exposed chunk of hull. That's another Reaper onto it. It just barely manages to vent in time and phase through the next set of torpedoes, but I don't think it's going to matter. I think all it takes is a couple heavy blaster shots, and there it goes. The Ziggurat is defeated. Tranquility not only takes the title of Brawl King, he also takes the title of Ziggurat Slayer. And there you have it. Tranquility takes first place in the Brawl King tournament, followed by Idiopathic in second place and Ubernoob in third place. Fourth place goes to Lortus, and then fifth place could either be myself with the Paragon fleet or the Burning Ones with the Afflictor fleet, although we're not going to be running that simulation to find out. I'd like to thank Mr. G Gaming for hosting this tournament, as well as everyone who submitted a fleet and participated. Looking at how much high-tech frigate spam dominated the top end of the tournament, it's probably a good idea in the future to look at different rule sets, maybe banning Wolfpack tactics, maybe reducing the maximum number of ships to encourage different playstyles. Regardless, it was a well-earned victory by Tranquility, and there's a lot to learn from these matches. You bet I'll be analyzing them soon. But until next time, that'll be Big Brain Energy, signing off.